Alles Gute zum neuen Jahr.
Shana Tova.
Feliz Año Nuevo.
Чего новоборшо?
Szczęśliwego Nowego Roku.
Gelukkig Nieuwjaar.
Najbardziej szubkamnai. Z Nowym Годом.
新年快樂
Maligong bagong taon.
表现这样的对明个老票吧这些。
Bon année.
Nami saldi nga badanya.
Kali protokronia.
Buon anno.
新年快乐
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you for supporting all of us at the Queens Public Library. We wish you and your families a great New Year.
Begin 2023 with a library card. Get access to all our materials, including books, ebooks, e-magazines, music, movies, and more. Apply in person at your nearest QPL location or apply for an e-card online at queenslibrary.org. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is on January 16th. To honor this civil rights icon, we have special programs and recommended books and movies. Visit our blog at queenslibrary.org for more information. Join us for a new year of virtual author talks. Our Literary Thursday series brings you live conversations with amazing writers every Thursday at 6 p.m. Learn more at queenslib.org/Literary Thursdays. Celebrate Lunar New Year, the year of the rabbit, with our programs and book recommendations. You can learn more at queenslib.org/LNY 2023.
Welcome to Queens Public Library's talk with filmmaker Jason Loftus and artist Da Sheng about their feature film Eternal Spring. The Guardian calls it a vivid, troubling documentary that reconstructs how Chinese activists hijacked the airwaves of state TV in the northeastern city of Changchun in March 2002. The Los Angeles Times writes, distinctively incisive on an emotional level, the film applauds the bravery of its participants to relieve a painful shared trauma and create a permanent testament of what they endured. Screen International states, featuring vivid animation inspired by Da Sheng's drawings, the film is somber and hushed, able to stir emotions without resorting to manipulative tricks. Hi, I'm Brian Alessandro. Culture Connection, curated by Daniel Zaleski and now in its 9th year at the Queens Public Library, is proud to present international artists from emerging talents to award-winning masters. These disciplines include music, theater, and author talks, as well as film. Now expanding into a virtual format, Culture Connection is currently reaching a global audience. Jason Loftus is a Canadian filmmaker. As the CEO of Lofty Sky Entertainment, he was executive producer of the 2014 documentary film Human Harvest, which was a Peabody Award recipient for documentary programming in 2015, and a Donald Britton Award nominee at the 4th Canadian Screen Awards in 2016. Da Sheng is a comic book artist, editor, and publisher. He placed first at the Shanghai Animation and Comic Competition and received top honors at the 33rd annual anniversary of Angoulême International Comics Festival, France's Comic-Con. Thank you both for joining us this afternoon, Jason and Da Sheng, and Happy Lunar New Year. I know it starts this weekend.
Thank you very much. Yeah, 新年快乐. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. 新年快乐，恭喜发财。
Please tell us a little bit about the Falun Gong for people who are not familiar with them. It's practiced in 100 countries, but only persecuted in China, where it originated. Is that correct? So that could be a question for either one of you.
Sure. Da Sheng, do you want to talk about Falun Gong?
I think you should be talking.
Okay, I'll start. I mean, it's a practice that involves sort of 5 slow-moving exercises. 4 of them are standing exercises, and 1 of them is a seated meditation. And it's in the tradition of a Buddhist school self-refinement practice, which was something that was different types of practices have existed for a long time throughout Chinese antiquity. When the communists took over in 1949, there was a sort of opposition to traditional Chinese religion and spirituality. Temples were destroyed, monks were forced to marry, this kind of thing. And as a result, a lot of these traditions sort of fell away for a little bit. There was a reemergence of this Qigong craze during the aftermath of the Cultural Revolution, which ended in 1976. At that time, a lot of the healthcare system in China was in a bit of a shambles. Everything was, quite in disarray. And they saw that this Qigong sort of practice, these different types of slow-moving exercises, were something that were beneficial for people's health. So they tolerated and even encouraged them. And there was sort of a state administration to oversee the different Qigong practices that existed. So the difference with these practices is that under communist rule, they were basically introduced. Qi and Gong are 2 words that both mean energy. So they were sort of disconnecting from the terminology and the sort of origins that had more of a spiritual connotation to them, which a lot of these practices did in the past. And so because of that, they were tolerated, encouraged, and they became widely practiced. Falun Gong became the most popular among these. And it was introduced in 1992 by a man named Li Hongzhi in northeast China, this city called Changchun, which is where our story takes place in this film. And it immediately became extremely popular in China. Tens of millions, some estimates put it at potentially 70 to 100 million people by 1999 were practicing this. And the difference with Falun Gong is it sort of reintroduced this connection to spirituality. It was, talking about not just these movements for health, but also these spiritual tenets. In Falun Gong, the ideals are truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. And this idea that these are the principles of the universe, and by integrating these sort of values and precepts into your life, that you would elevate mind and body kind of going together. So this really resonated with people who had been sort of disconnected from spirituality and traditions, but it also, I think, created some anxiety among communist leaders who had, saw something that emerged and now was potentially even rivaling Communist Party in terms of number of people who were adhering to it. And it was not something under their control. So in 1999, the practice was banned by communist authorities, and people who continued to practice were then subject to detention, and many reports then human rights groups and UN special rapporteurs documenting torture, abuse, detention. And this is the context for this film, which is that these people in northeast China, in Changchun, where Falun Gong was first introduced, they felt they had no recourse. The government had banned their faith. They had benefited from it. They didn't want to stop practicing it. And they felt their efforts to sort of counter the government narrative, at first through sort of handing out samizdat flyers and leaflets and these kinds of things, they would end up getting arrested. And so they just felt they had no voice. And so there's a group of them that hatched a plan and said, we're going to climb the television poles in prime time and use our own sort of home, DVD players and hack into the cable and broadcast our own home video to counter the government's narrative.
And this is, of course, is what happened on March 5th, 2002.
Yes, a little over 20 years now. Yep.
So before we get into that, Dashang, did you want to add anything to your experiences with Falun Gong?
法轮功呢，它是基于中国传统的这些修炼方法，就是让你身体健康的这种修炼方法，包括道家的、佛家的，它是在中国有深厚的文化背景的这么一个气功。
Falun Gong is based on Chinese traditional religion,
Taoist,
Buddhism. It helps people's health, and both mentally and physically.
Go ahead.
A lot of people is doing Falun Gong that time exercise. It's over, I think, nearby 的1亿人在修炼法轮功，很多人都在。
About 100 million people were practicing Falun Gong in China around 1999.
Go ahead. 问题问到就是说，为什么在中国受迫害？那么我想，就是因为它人数太多了，比共产党员的人数还要多，所以引起了共产党的这种猜忌和把它作为一种政治势力来对待。
Because of the popularity of Falun Gong in China. So it threatens Chinese communist the rule.
I remember growing up in New York and seeing in the 90s, Jason, I don't know how you were introduced to Falun Gong or this particular incident and what inspired you to make this film. I want to know in a moment, but growing up in Queens and in Manhattan in the 1990s, I remember very theatrical and powerful demonstrations by exponents of the Falun Gong against the Chinese government. How did you learn about them, and what brought you to this particular story?
I was in high school in the 90s, and I had this fascination with Eastern philosophy and meditation, and I had explored different practices. And so I encountered Falun Gong first in 1998, which was a year before the ban and crackdown. And it was at a health show. It was more just like looked to me like a Chinese yoga, connected with these people. They seemed very kind. I spent time with the practice. And then a year later, there was this ban announced in China. And at the time I was in high school. And so a lot of the background that I just shared with you are things that I've sort of come to understand after the fact, because I've gained an interest in the subject and I've looked into it and tried to understand how this all came about. But at the time, I was 19 years old and I knew very little about Chinese politics. And I just couldn't reconcile what I was hearing, this narrative that these people are evil and dangerous, and then what I was encountering directly through the practice and through these people in the community. And so that sparked my concern for the human rights situation in China. And, as time went by and I connected with Dashong because we were making a Kung Fu video game a number of years ago. So my company makes different types of media. And among them are narrative video games. And we were looking for an artist who could draw these hand-drawn panels for us because we had this narrative component, this sort of visual novel aspect of the video game we were making. And we learned about Dashong. And he was, of course, he's known in the West for his work on Justice League and Star Wars and these big comic franchises. Right. But he'd also worked with Jin Yong, who's the leading Kung Fu novelist in China. We just thought his cultural background with, working in the martial arts space and having his Chinese background and his prowess in obviously in comics in general, I just thought it was perfect. We brought him up to Toronto. We were collaborating on this game, and then we learned his story of why he had to flee China. And Dashong comes from the same hometown as my wife and producing partner, Masha Loftus, which is this city we've talked about called Chongqing. But Masha is not part of the Falun Gong community, and she was actually the daughter of a mid-level government official in the city. And so for her, hearing what people had endured under her nose in her own city, and the fact that these people's stories were completely unknown to people in China and what they had gone through, it really hit home for her. And she was adamant that this is a story we needed to tell. And by this point, we developed a relationship with Dashong. We knew what kind of person he was, and just hearing what he had endured for his faith and what people around him had endured, it just sparked this interest. And I said, I already had this fascination and this kind of connection with the Falun Gong a subject already and a concern for the human rights. So we wanted to explore it. And we just felt this was also from an artistic standpoint, a really unique opportunity because there were other animated documentaries, a number of them I've loved. I mean, we talked before in the preamble before we came on about Flea, which is a beautiful film. Can't claim it as an inspiration because I didn't see it until I finished my work on this one. It's more recent, but there were others like Waltz with Bashir before, and even Tower uses rotoscoping. There was a number of films that I really enjoyed, and working in both docs and animation, I had this sort of fascination with the intersection of the two. But I always felt like when you see animation and documentary, it was always just there. It's presented, it's the invisible hand of the director. It can be executed very well and it can be very effective and it's beautiful. But I always wanted to know, like, what are the subjective decisions that are going into this? And especially, if you have an artist who's connected to the story, and in Dashong's case, he's facing the trauma of having endured some torture. He's been separated from his home. Yeah. All of that is reflected in his pen. And so this inspired the idea of using Dashong's art as an exploration of this story and bringing that art to life through the film.
An incredibly personal story and project for Dashong. So tell us, please, about this incident on March 5th, 2002 in Chongqing. What happened? There was a hijacking. Talk to me about the fallout from the hijacking. And while you do that, there's a quote I wanted to share from the film. Chinese history has taught us Chinese people a lesson. Stand up to the party and you will suffer. So if you can kind of just speak to that quote and also tell us about what happened and the results. If you want to start.
Dashong, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah. 他在问的问题是3月5号长春那天发生了什么事情，是不是？
Yes.
Yeah. 3月5号呢是长春的冬天， 还没有结束，快要到春天的那个日子里。
It was the winter in Changchun
对，and
on March 5th.
and 那一天呢，其实我在家里的时候呢，我就接到了电话，就跟我讲说，这个法轮功被平反了，被中共就不再迫害法轮功了。然后我第一反应就是不可能，然后问为什么，他说电视上已经播了法轮功在世界上红传的这种真相，然后我就知道这是一个发生了这种插播事件，肯定是法轮功学员把这个电视信号播放了法轮功的真相。
他是首先那一天呢，大雄在家里接到一个电话，那个电话是告诉他说，中共官方不再迫害法轮功了。
Yeah.
那结果真相是呢，是人们听到了插播的消息，
Yeah.
是法轮功学员hijacked
对
他们的消息，所以呢，当时大雄就是不相信这是事实，果然他也是对的，就是并不是这么回事，是因为人们听到了真相。
Sure, you speak English. You should speak English.
Yeah. So people thought that the truth the Falun Gong people told was true. Actually, it was not.
So I think what she's getting at is that at the time, people didn't know how to interpret. Dashong talked a little bit about how it was in the evening, and he got phone calls from his colleagues, and in the comic studio he had there, and people thought that the government had actually redressed Falun Gong. They didn't understand that the signal had been intercepted, and they thought that they were congratulating each other, like, "Hey, good job, Falun Gong! You have your freedom back." This kind of thing. They didn't recognize that people had actually, and Dashong had a sense that something was brewing that was going to bring a pretty heavy hammer down on those people who were part of the community.
And then the consequences were great. I mean, the fallout was pretty great for a lot of these people who participated in that. I want to take a break from this incident and ask, get some sort of background from Dashong. What made you fall in love with comics, and how are Chinese comics different from Western comics?
Yeah, as Chinese comic is actually I think this from maybe looks like the Chinese Beijing opera. It's the stage. The people stand at the stage, and to get some pause, people can understand this pause means something. But I think the Western comic, like the American comic, is most like the movie. They have the shot from this, and the shot jump to the other shot. This is like the American style.
More dynamic, faster paced, maybe.
Yeah. More you jump.
The camera angles, more film language in the camera angles, probably. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, this is what I want to see.
Thank you, MTV. Right? I mean, they're the rapid montage. Why was Falun Gong such a threat to the Chinese government? What scares them so much about it?
I said is people. Too much people believe they. The communism. The Communist Party in China, they don't believe any religion. You must believe in Karl Marx. You must believe in Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao is long live, and he is the powerful than God. We must believe that. But in China, when I was young, they don't believe that. The Chinese people believe in money. Okay, you believe in money is okay. You doesn't hurt me. But you believe another about the religion, they will scare it.
It's harder to control, maybe harder to control the masses.
Hard.
Yeah.
I think there's something interesting there too, because we see this kind of conflict in other communist societies for for people who've read like Gulag Archipelago and all. What's happened in the Soviets. Like there's always this opposition with religion, but what I think is interesting with Falun Gong in particular is that it was something that was native to China in the sense that it's part of this kind of Chinese tradition of spirituality. It's rooted in these kind of Buddhist ideas and these traditions. And the Marxist ideology is something that came from the West. So I think there was a heightened concern around things that were sort of more rooted or connected in a traditional China prior to the Communist Party. That was seen even more perhaps as an ideological threat. And I think there's another distinction too. I mean, there are many other groups that are persecuted in China for their religion. If we see a lot of similarities in the treatment of the Uyghurs in the Northwest and Tibetan Buddhists and what they have endured. But what I think is also something to point out with regards to Falun Gong is that it was easier for the party to portray an us versus them narrative with the Uyghurs and with the Tibetans, because these are generally geographically isolated and ethnically distinct communities where they're saying, okay, the Uyghurs are presented as terrorists, the Tibetans are presented as separatists, and they have a narrative. It's sort of a very clear us versus them. The additional challenge with Falun Gong is that it was growing extremely popular, but it was also among the Han majority Chinese people. So you had people who were party officials, you had other people at every level of society, professors, people, students, everybody in between were practicing Falun Gong. And this was it was not something that was, just like isolated in a certain area. So that us versus them became, I think, more difficult for them to put forward. And as a result, the heavy hammer came down very hard on Falun Gong in particular, and this sort of incessant propaganda campaign against it.
There was something said in the film that really struck me about the hijacking of the airwaves on March 5th, 2002. And that was that it was maybe against the principles of Falun Gong. And there was a sense of conflict about being a part of it. Can you both talk to me a little bit about that? Or Dr. Shang, can you speak to that?
Sorry, what's the question?
This idea of being part of the hijacking of the airwaves.
大雄他问你有法轮功学员有一部分他们觉得不
Yeah, I know. Because the Falun Gong told the people, you must follow the law. You must don't against anybody, don't fight anybody. Just be peaceful. That is the Falun Gong taught us to do. But also Falun Dafa taught us to do the believe in truth. And this is the Falun Gong team is argue. They argue what's we need to do, which way is right.
真善美
Yeah.
Truth.
Yeah.
Choose the choice. It was
Kindness.
like a difficult moral philosophical choice in that moment.
Yeah.
I'd like to take a look at the trailer so our viewers who haven't yet seen the film can get a greater sense of what we're talking about in a context.
我觉得长城就是一个小孩子看的一本童话书，当然还有很多在那种寒冷冬天下那个人与人之间的友谊，小朋友之间的、亲人之间的那种非常温暖的感觉。当时在那个插播之后，他们跟着我，所以我觉得也是我们该离开的时候了。
我们唯一的诉求就是要通过一种方式讲述一种真相。
任其迫害，大家谁也不说话。他杀人放火了，那你是人吗？
当我画的时候呢，其实我作为一个专业的从业人员的时候，我并不难。但是当我在体会当时那种带回那种回忆的时候呢，我有一种很沉重的被压抑的感觉。
《
So it's a beautiful film, Jason. And Dashang, your art is stunning. Congratulations to both of you for making such a powerful work of art. What was the purpose of hijacking state TV? Previously, the group had handed out CDs to set the record straight, to thwart the propaganda against them that was being doled out by the government. Can you speak a little bit to that?
I think part of it there is that they didn't feel that they could compete on some level by just handing out flyers. And this is, you mentioned just before the segue into the trailer that there were different opinions. And I felt that this was really interesting because, Falun Gong is also, I think, poorly understood outside of China. And it's a group that seems far away. And sometimes what tends to happen is this kind of like compartmentalization. We want to just quickly fit it into a box of something we already understand. It's this or it's that. And I felt it was interesting to see differences of opinion within the community. People who felt it was a wrong idea, or like that, it's going to result in a lot of suffering for other people and this kind of thing. And I think through that kind of dispute, you can come to understand why people felt that they needed to do this, at least those who went ahead with it, and gain some kind of appreciation for their perspective. But I sense really it was just that they were suffering a lot in terms of the persecution, and they really didn't have a recourse or a voice. All the media inside China, not just state media, all of them would either not give Falun Gong any voice or simply just repeat, ad nauseum the anti-Falun Gong sort of narrative from the Chinese state. And it's to the point where people who are family members and stuff are afraid to associate with you. It's like it just becomes this onslaught. So these people really felt isolated, and they felt, even handing out a leaflet or putting it under, people don't necessarily pick that up and read it and really think about what you have to say. They're going to say, oh, here's Falun Gong, and turn you in, right? Because they already have this kind of filter. So there's a group of people who felt, we need to be competing on a different level here if we're going to reach people, if we're going to connect with them and break through this noise. And so I think that's where this idea came from. If we could reach a lot more people, if we do that. And that's what Mr. White, we're fortunate to come across the only surviving hijacker who's gotten out of China in Mr. White. And he gives us this insight into sort of how they went about it and why they were doing it.
I was going to ask, Dashang, did you want to add anything to that before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, we tried a lot of different ways to tell the people the truth, but it's like nothing. People know that, but we still feeling a lot of the pressure from the society.
Sure.
So we think we should to tell the more detail to let the people to know. So we tried many ways, and the hijack is the last choice.
And the most effective, it was the one that reached the greatest number of people in the shortest amount of time, right? Can you tell me how many members of Falun Gong have the Chinese government imprisoned, how many they've killed? And they also destroyed many books and films, right?
Yeah, it's very hard to talk, I think. Like right now, for the pandemic, the Chinese still cover the real number. And this is the secret, top secret in China. But in my feeling, as I know the from Falun Gong practitioner, almost everyone is in the prison, and we have a different how to say, on different way to go, but everybody have the trouble.
Beyond just the members of Falun Gong being at odds with the government, even families, people who practice Falun Gong within families whose principles or philosophies, ideologies weren't shared by every member of a family, that hurt families as well. It tore families in half on some level. Can you speak a little bit to that? Were there any of those experiences that you came across in making the film, or Dashang growing up in the region? Do you know of anybody whose families were affected by people with regard to disagreements?
Yeah, I can, for example, for my family, actually, my father and my family is they love me, and I love my father, my family too. But my father, for example, he knows Falun Gong is good. He knows Falun Gong make me good, but he's afraid. He's afraid government. He want to protect me, so he burned my book. do a lot of things to lock me in home. Don't do anything against the communism. This is why. But I think that a lot of family in China have the same situation because a lot of people, they are afraid about the government.
And that is explored in the film too. Is your father burning your books? What was it like for you personally, emotionally, to revisit these events of 2002 with Jason in order to make this film?
Until now, it's almost over 20 years after.
Yeah,
a lot of people doesn't know what's happening in China, and a lot of people interesting about my story. It's you are the artist. You must have the different, very fantastic story. That's tell me why you are in China. You can make money. But why you come to here, and your English is not good. You are nobody. You come here. Mm-hmm. Why? Okay, I should tell him my story. It's not my story. It's about my generation story. This time in China, something's real happened, but the government still cover that. We like to open that to see it, like people to see this one.
So like a cathartic or a relief for you, like a relief to be able to finally speak it and draw it and explain it to people.
It's relieved me a lot, I think, Jason. Thank you. Yeah. And I think I can, over 20 years, I still very, very difficult to look back to this, what happened in China, because it's very hard, very tough. And when I draw this story, think of this story, talk with Jason, I can't see these stories more clearly, and I can see myself what's weak side in me. I should to face that. 20 years after, what I should do. Maybe I'm wrong. I can fix that. This is what I think, right, Jason?
Thank you, Dashang, for telling us about that and speaking so honestly about it. Jason, the production of the film, because it was animated, was it all done in Canada? Did you have to go to China at all for the film?
No, we had stringers who shot some footage for us in the city, and footage that we had acquired, but we didn't end up using any of the footage there. It was a reference for us to satisfy us that we had sort of captured the spirit of things, but really the point of the film became all about Dashong's personal
memory,
envisioning of this, and
right.
Also the collective recreation of memory, because he's with his other sort of fellow Changchun practitioners who are now living abroad, who've come out of the country. And there's something really interesting, I think, about, it's different for when I'm just sitting across behind the camera and we're interviewing someone and, you're genuinely empathetic of what they're sharing, you're nodding. It's different when you add a dimension of having someone who has a shared experience like Dashong, and he's drawing what they're saying while they're talking about it, and they can see what he's drawing, and it just brings this connection. And I think it helps people to open up, especially about things that are difficult. I mean, the people that we have on camera are all people who adamantly wanted to tell their stories. This is something that was important to me as well. It's, as Dashong just spoke, this is difficult material to revisit. It's painful, and you can't ethically push someone into that. It's not about getting a signature on a release form. It's about, is someone ready to explore that? Do they want to? And Dashong really came wanting to explore this event that had impacted his life, and other people wanted to tell this story. I think there's an element there with people who've experienced trauma, especially when they're surrounded by people who did not survive. There's an element of survivor's guilt. It's like, why did I come through this? Why am I still here? And other people, my friend or people I knew, how come they died?
Sure.
And you carry that with you. And when you're able to tell their story, and, especially in this context, because these are people who died trying to speak out. They were trying to speak out and say something, and their life was snuffed out. And for these people who are serving as subjects in our film and as witnesses to what happened, and they're able to help tell the story of Big Truck and Liang, I could see what it meant for them, not only in being able to tell the story, but then seeing Dashong creating it with them, and then seeing it play on the screen. Like, we screened at Film Forum in New York And I remember the opening weekend, we did the Q&As there, and I saw in the audience Little Wei, who's one of the subjects in the film, and Wang Jianming, who was detained together with Big Truck towards the end of that story. And they had lost people who were close to them. And they were at both the Q&As. I think they were at all the matinees. I think they went to see the film 10 times that weekend. Wow. And you could see what it meant for them to be able to see other people connecting with the people that they knew, and that they're able to play a role in helping to carry their message and their story on. I think there's something powerful about that. There's also something powerful about the artistic process. And I think those of us who get to tell stories for a living, we sense it on some level. When we really engage with material and we really pour our hearts into a story, you end up growing through that process. I think there's a change that happens with the creator as well, if you're really kind of thinking and trying to find the heart of a story and you conveying that to people. And so the opportunity here to pull the curtain back and to not just have the animation appear on screen, but to see the artist, and to see the artist with such a personal connection to the material, to see him process all of these events through his artwork, and to see the role that art can play in helping him to gain some healing and catharsis. That to me was something very unique to be able to share with an audience, because I think it speaks to the power that art has.
Sure, of course. Dashong, is it correct? You were arrested 3 times? There were 3?
Yes.
Okay.
Go
ahead.
我有3次被抓，但是呢，第一次是在7月22号，就是刚开始迫害法轮功当天。当时呢，我是一名记者，然后我就看到了这个警察在抓人，然后我就因为他们在抓一个像我母亲那么大年龄的老太太，然后我就阻止他，结果我也被抓了。
Okay, on July 22nd, Da Xiong was a journalist. He was saying the cops are arresting people, and was arresting a middle-aged woman, as similar age like Da Xiong's mother. And then he was also arrested, Da Xiong himself.
然后第2次被抓呢，其实就是因为插播这个事件 hijack 这个事件，他们当时呢就知道我，但是没有抓我，跟踪了我1年，他们想要知道我更多的背景，叫线索，抓到更多的人，所以在隔了1年以后的2月份，2003年的2月份就把我给抓了，又抓了一次我。
The second time was February year 2003. At first, they were following him, and then they put him in jail as well.
They follow me up after the hijacking. Hijacking is 2002 and March 5, and they know me and follow me about 1 year. Want to know how many people contact me, and follow me back to the Beijing, Shijiazhuang, Shanghai, a lot of contactor, and the 2003, and they catch me in jail, and a lot of people around me to here. And the third time, 第3次是因为在2008年奥运会之前，他们需要抓到一些反对中国政府的人士，又把我抓了进去。这次关到。
So the third time was before the Olympic year in year 2008, because they are afraid that the people who have different who are anti-communist groups that may cause them trouble.
And then okay, thank you, June. Thank you, Dashong. And then you left China in what year?
2008.
That same year. Okay. I have to ask, has the Chinese government seen the film? Have they issued any kind of statement? Did they ever attempt to reach out to either one of you about it?
So we felt their presence in different ways. So in the midst of making this film, so I mentioned that Dashong and I connected around a video game we were making together. It was called Shuyan Saga. That game was being published by Tencent, which is a major media company in China and a really large player in the gaming space internationally. And our game was being launched while we were working on this film, and we had interviewed a number of people. And all of a sudden, our game disappeared from the storefronts in China. And then I reached my rep at Tencent, and I was told that they had been visited by the Chinese authorities and that it was not an issue of the game. Two different ministries of the Chinese government, they have censorship bureaus in different ministries. They had already approved the game. The game was fine. It was an issue of me and my company. And they asked me, are you doing something not aligned with the Chinese government direction? And around the same time, my wife's family members in Changchun were harassed by the Public Security Bureau. And they were told, we know what you're up to overseas, or what your family members are up to overseas. So there was this kind of like veiled threat of, hey, we know who your family is in China. We know what you're up to, this kind of thing. And Dashong has faced this kind of thing. And a lot of the subjects of the film know this as well. And so when you're approaching something this sensitive and you're meeting with people, the first thing is you're concerned about, you don't want to push anybody into reliving trauma is one thing. And the other thing is that you don't want to cause any more threat or danger. And so it was a really eye-opening experience for me because, first of all, these people had gone through much more severe consequences inside China when they were already trying to speak out. So by the time they got out to China, they were all adamant that now they have the freedom to finally tell their story. They were aware of the risks, far more aware than I was, I believe. And they also communicated something to me that I found really inspiring, which was this idea that in many cases, it wasn't just that they wanted to tell their story. They also felt it was perhaps their best or only recourse. And what I mean is that, and this sort of something I experienced when I was interviewing a man from southern China who had been tortured in a Chinese detention center there. And when his conditions improved and he didn't know, he was in a prison at some point and he didn't know why they had stopped torturing him so severely, because they were treating him very badly and then things got better. And only when he came outside of China did he learn that his family members had been meeting with government officials in the US. They had got his name in human rights reports. He had appeared in media reports. And this kind of spotlight from outside China was something that the authorities inside China were aware of. And so the spotlight helped his situation. And so a lot of these people who come out, they want to tell their story. They want to carry on the message of others who don't have the freedom to speak. And at the same time, they think that this can help and help the situation there. And so when that relates to sort of the pressure that they apply to me as a filmmaker or my company, and also what we talk about often is the influence that they wield in Hollywood. I understand why a lot of people avoid sensitive subjects in China, and probably no more sensitive subject than the persecution of Falun Gong, to be honest. But I can't tell people that there aren't consequences, because I personally experienced this. But I understand well that what they're trying to do is to see how you react. So, if they threaten you, there's kind of the carrot and the stick. They might entice you with certain business opportunities, or they might sort of threaten business opportunities, or threaten, through family members, apply pressure and this kind of thing. And they're looking to see how you react. And if you change your behavior, then they know that they have a lever they can pull. And so they want you to change, they want you to do this, or they want you to do that. They know that they can get you to do that through this. So I took my lead really from, the people around me. My wife, who has a lot more consequences in China, and she was adamant, this is a story we need to tell despite the consequences, all the other film subjects. And then people like Dashong, they didn't stop with Dashong. The day after this film was chosen as Canada's Oscar entry on August 24th, and August 25th, he was listed as a banned author in China. And they've been pressuring his father. They mentioned he doesn't communicate directly with his father. Yeah.
Are you banned as well, Jason?
If I get an invitation to screen the film there, it's probably with a one-way ticket, so I don't think I'll take it.
Wow.
At this point, they're definitely aware of what we've done, and they don't tend to issue a news release and draw more attention to the film through conflict. Instead, they like to apply pressure behind the scenes. And I think because of that, it's important that when they do that, you shine a light on it, because that removes some of the incentive. They're trying to silence you. And I think it's important not to stop speaking up.
Agreed. Dashong, did you want to add to that at all? Did you? Jason spoke about what happened the day after Canada submitted the film for the Academy Awards. You became a banned author. Artist.
他们这个原来中国呢对我进行了一个封锁，在之后电影出来之后对我进行大的封锁，因为我在中国出版的图书有100多本。那么他首先就是下了一个条令，就把我的所有的书都销毁掉，就不要在公开场合出现。
Dashong had over 100 publications in China. So since the the publishing of the movie, all the books are burned.
Gosh.
Destroyed.
Yeah.
因为我的书呢因为我是画画的，我教很多这个孩子画画，我的书呢一直作为他们这个高中和大学的教材，那么也被下架了，就是不允许再提我这个名字了。
So his books are all taken off from the shelf because his books are mostly used as the high school, college, classroom teaching materials.
Library, teaching materials.
So now also his name are not allowed to mention.
Oh. Well, I mean, they're also being translated, of course, into many other languages, including English. Is that right? Are they available in other countries?
You said the book?
Your books.
Yes,
the ones that you worked
some
on.
of them is most popular in the Asian, something like Korean, Hong Kong, Taiwan, or Japan, or something. So,
Most of the countries are Asian countries.
Okay.
That's published.
You said that a lot of your fellow Falun Gong practitioners, those who helped to spread the truth about the practice in March 2002, are like the heroes that you read about during your childhood in the film. That was very touching. Can you say a little bit more about that, Dashong?
I have as a boy, I have the hero's dream.
Mm-hmm.
I think the hero must have the supernormal, like the Superman, or rich, like the Batman, or you have the strong, you have martial art. But
他小的时候，或者说每一个中国的小男孩吧，都有一种英雄情节，都是受那些中国的小人书，我们comics in English 受那个影响，所以 everybody wanted to become a hero, want to be very powerful, very rich, and be able to help everybody.
这个经过了这个这几十年的人生经历和法轮功的迫害，我更了解了什么是真正的英雄。
So after the 2 decades of the experience of being persecuted, and he has understood what is a real hero.
他可能不具备那么好的超级能力，哪怕在你非常弱小的时候，你也敢于面对邪恶，这才是真正的英雄。
Now, a real hero is brave enough and dare to face the evil of the society.
Yes, even you are very well, you are very little, but you have strong heart to face this hero.
It's very heroic and very powerful to have the bravery to stand up against something so large and intimidating like an entire government. We're going to start taking questions for Jason and Dashong. So if you have them ready, please start sending them in. Jason, I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about the Academy Award nominations are this coming Tuesday. And you are Canada's official entry in 3 categories. Is it?
So Canada makes the international, each country makes an entry for the international feature. So we were honored to be Canada's official submission. It is the first Mandarin film that they've ever chosen, first doc and first animated film. Wow. We qualified in 3 categories with the Oscars, which were, of course, the international feature representing Canada, and then documentary feature, as well as the animated feature category. And so we remain in contention in the animated side of things. We fell outside of the shortlist for the other 2 categories, but we were proud of the run we had with the competition. We're up against some large studios and such. We really had a lot of people connecting with the film, and that's what, we didn't anticipate any of this, really, to be honest, the attention that the film has gotten. You work on something, we kind of chipped away at this one for close to 6 years, and we didn't know what we were going to get. We were just trying to, I think as a filmmaker, you want to just do justice to the material you have. Something connects with you. There's a story that really resonates with you, and you're just trying to, within the confines of the frame that you have on the screen and the 90-minute sort of format, you're just trying to communicate and share with people that same experience, that same feeling. And so there's a lot of heart that went into it with a very small team. We had only 4 people in our animation department, which is
Wow, that's
sort of
very
unheard
small.
of.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely
Yeah.
the smallest of all the contending films there. And only one guy did the lighting and rendering for the entire feature,
Wow.
which I don't know if has happened before. It's crazy.
That's
So a
incredible.
very small and passionate team, but we shared this vision of, wanting to, I think this kind of unique approach, this blend of animation and documentary and an important story. And so, whatever sort of happens on the awards front, we're just appreciative that it has drawn more attention to this story and that we get the opportunity to talk with more people about it. I think there are relevant things with it, that are beyond the Falun Gong community. Obviously, it's great to shine a light because this persecution of Falun Gong continues. And a lot of times, because it's been 20 years, people have kind of, their attention has moved on and we think it's a thing from the past. But the reality is that there are people we're meeting through the making of this film who are just coming out of these labor camps, and people who are depicted in the film who are still unreachable in China because they're under house arrest or some other kind of treatment. So that's important, but it is also about other communities that are suffering the same thing. The Uyghurs in the northwest of China who face very similar treatment, detained in the, potentially into the millions now, and sort of coerced to abandon their traditions and beliefs and going through different treatment. We've talked about the Tibetans. Also in Hong Kong, the erosion of freedoms and the inability to challenge official narratives. There's a lot of sort of echoes of what we see in this story that are current today. And so we really value the opportunity to have conversations like this about it.
I was in China for 3 months in 2011, and I spent a week and a half in Tibet. And the presence is very felt, and it's and as an outsider, as a tourist visiting, it was very palpable. So I can't even imagine how much more daunting it was for the Tibetans, the Buddhists, the Uyghurs, the Falun Gong practitioners. One of the questions came in. Thank you for this excellent program. How long did it take you to research and make your film? I would imagine it is banned in China. How has it been received in other Asian countries? Well, you said 6 years, right, Jason?
Yeah, close to 6 years making this film. And this is obviously a story that has been, Dashong has carried with him for 2 decades now, and that others have as well. So it was a long time coming to be able to tell this story. The film has played in Dharamshala in India in a festival there. It will have a theatrical release in Taiwan coming up in April, which we're very excited about. Very close to China, a lot of people with a sort of shared culture and history who can hopefully be exposed to this, which we're looking forward to very much. We are still in the works in a number of other Asian countries, and this is an interesting dynamic we had. I'm hoping that the attention and the success that the film has had will embolden more of these Asian countries, but some of them we would have an offer at a festival and then have it reneged at an Asian festival overseas, or we would have, one that's short, like we're pre-selected and then it just goes silent, and a broadcaster at a major Asian broadcaster who wanted to pick up the film and then, said it was too sensitive. And I think what we've seen is, with what's happened in Hong Kong and what's, the sort of saber rattling that you see with the Chinese authorities, and then seeing what happened with Russia's aggression in the Ukraine, I think a lot of Asian countries were concerned about upsetting China. And so we've recognized this sort of hesitancy, but I do sense a shift in that. I sense people recognizing that, we need to be able to talk about these things because it's the freedoms that we want to hold on to. These are the things that are important. If we can't talk about them, then we're kind of already, and I've noticed this shift with the Chinese people as well. A lot of times in the past, people who weren't part of a persecuted or dissident group in China would avoid these subjects when they were Chinese. Everyone who's living in an authoritarian regime, they need to form their own sort of mental model so that they can operate. So the model would be, well, Falun Gong has a conflict with the government. And as long as I'm not part of Falun Gong, then, that's their business and I can just go about my life. And, the same thing would hold for any other group, whether it's the Uyghurs or any other group. Well, I'm not part of that. And I think, Dashong alluded a little bit to what people have suffered during the sort of heavy, extreme lockdowns in China we've seen in the news. And, we see people coming out of China now who recognize, it isn't just this group. It's the regime itself, that doesn't care about its people. When you have people who simply live next door to a building where one person had a positive test, and they're all being, cordoned off to these sort of indefinite quarantine camps, and they're being poked and prodded constantly and, locked inside their homes without ability to get groceries at times or medical care. They recognize, hold on, it isn't an issue of Falun Gong and the government. It's an issue of the regime not caring about its people. And that has made people shift in focus a little bit. Instead of like avoiding the Falun Gong subject, there's kind of a renewed curiosity. Well, how have you endured this for 20 years? How have you what has inspired you to go through this. And
Yeah.
so I think that's one positive in a very dark situation. Otherwise, is that there's more understanding between different communities in China, which I think is a positive step towards better things in the future.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting and compelling insight, Jason. Thank you. We have a question from Austria. Greetings from Austria. When and how will it be possible to make local or online screenings with this documentary? I'd like to share it with my community.
So the film has been acquired by Vice. I mean, that's the main thing. They will stream the film sometime I believe in the first half of this year. We don't have a date yet. If you're interested, please do visit our website. The easiest way for us to communicate with everyone with major announcements is through our newsletter. We don't bombard people with messages through there, but if you're looking for when it is released and where to access it, the website eternalspringfilm.com will be the best place to check that out. There are also other broadcast partners. So, Arte has picked it up for Germany and France. I'm not sure, Austria specifically in terms of broadcast, but those things will be announced through the website as well. So please do check us out there and follow us. We'd appreciate it.
Great. And that website is in the comments section, we should say. So if you want to just find it there, eternalspringfilm.com. Jason, Dashong, and June, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's been really fantastic and illuminating and deeply moving. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It's been
you.
a pleasure.
Thank you.